Hello, my fellow Americans. 'Tis I, the rumpled one. Tuesday, September 4th, 2012. The day after Labor Day. Now, I guess I've put out a couple of videos that I've talked about the economy, and many of you disagree because I make the statement that the economy's fine, and you've pointed out many examples, all valid, of why you think the economy's not so fine. Well, let me take a little different tact and explain a little bit differently to you. There is no middle class, okay? And there never has been. It's a myth. Now, if you saw the title of this and you had a knee-jerk reaction and your immediate action was to think of reasons why I'm wrong, then the Matrix has you. You see, in science, you come up with a theory, and then your goal is to try and prove the theory wrong. Not right, but wrong. Because if you can't prove it wrong, then it must be right. So, once again, when you have a huge reaction to something, a big emotional reaction, a violent reaction, there's usually something for you to learn. Back in 1972, there's this book called The Myth of the Middle Class. Fortunately, I read it back in the 70s. I got it for 50 cents. It wasn't very popular. Regular price was $7.95. Written by Richard Parker. Well, you see, there's a couple of ways you can divide things up. And once you divide things up, that sets your framework. And then you can go on and look for examples to prove that framework. Remember what I talked to you about the book Sanity, Insanity, and Common Sense? How they spoke of the same thing? See, basically the words you use, that's going to describe your own personal reality or your own perception. So if you say there's a upper class, a middle class, and then the lower class, then that's the way you're going to divide things. But what if that division is arbitrary and basically false in its premise? What then? Well, let's look at history. Kings and pharaohs, slaves, lords and serfs. It's always been one or the other. Well, when you come to American history, what do you really have? Well, first you had everybody kind of toiling the land, just trying to survive. But then, the Industrial Revolution. What happened? You had management and workers, owners, workers. And that's the way it is today. Basically, you have two classes. But the way I'm going to define them or distinguish them is by independence or dependence. You are either financially independent or you are financially dependent. It's that simple. If you're financially independent, things like taxes and rising prices doesn't matter to you. You probably will go out and spend $5,000 on a watch or a handbag. Or, I mean, you'll drive a $250,000 car. You'll live in a, $10 million house. You're financially independent. It doesn't matter. Or you could be financially independent and you might just have a small piece of dirt. You might live in a trailer. But you're not working for anybody and you're getting by day to day, and maybe you go out When I say you're not working for anybody, you don't have a job. Maybe you go fish, maybe you hunt, maybe you cut trees, maybe you cut grass, maybe you do a little farming and sell at the farmer's market. You do whatever it takes, but you're not really dependent on a job or anybody else. You're your own dog, as I like to say. Or you've got a paycheck. And it was said, I believe in the 90s, that most people were 2 paychecks away from being broke. Well, when that real estate bubble hit, that came true. All those people that used to ride around in their Beamers and Mercedes and live out in the burbs, the yuppies, their worlds came crashing down. They lost their job, and look at where they are. Debt up to their eyeballs, if not above. So you see, my fellow Americans, you've been fooled, you've been duped, because the way they talk about things, they talk about it in a way to fool you, as opposed to saying financially independent or financially dependent. And chances are, most people are financially dependent because they weren't taught any different. Luckily, once again, through my education and the desire to understand money, and just the idea that there was a class of people that didn't have to work. I remember this back in 6th grade, back in about 1966, I think it was. And I remember we read something, and they talked about the leisure class, where these people didn't work. They went out fox hunting. They put on gowns and robes and wigs, and they went ballroom dancing, and you know, they had read poetry and looked at art. The leisure class. I thought, wow, that's what I want to be. I don't want to work my life away. So that's what I aspired to do. And so it put me on that path. But most people didn't think like that. And I think about, you know, you go to school, you get good grades, you get a job. I didn't want to work 40-some years and get a golden watch. That just seemed a waste. I watched my father work hard. You know, always working. For what, a couple weeks of vacation a year? That just didn't seem right to me. So, back. The myth of the middle class. Let me read something. There's a lot of things I could read to you, but maybe you could find this book. It's probably out of print, but let me read from starting on page 168. To its staunch defenders, the use of the term middle class is a testimony to the triumph of the American economy. But measured against the statistics carefully gathered in this book and elsewhere, the usage bears the marks of cruel deception. A country cannot easily continue to call itself middle class when 20 million malnourished lived in its midst, or a third of its populace lives in poverty, or the majority do not have what the government's own agency described as a moderately comfortable standard of living. Somewhere, myth has sharply diverged from reality. In Chapter 1, it was suggested that faced with a divergent reality, the myth of the middle class gains its strength by serving a twofold purpose. On the one hand, for the lower middle class blue and white collar worker, it removes the sting that a more rigid, carefully divided class structure brings, and allows a leverage in economic negotiations for higher wage demands. On the other hand, it sanctifies the high pay, status, and security of the upper middle class, because ostensibly these advantages are common or available to the middle class as a whole. Such an explanation, however, does not reach the crux of the matter. After admitting there is no vast affluent middle class in America and that income and wealth stratification exists to the disadvantage of the majority, we must then ask if such stratification is really necessary, and if it is not, what may be done to abolish it. In other words, Does the structure of industrial society impose on us a permanent economic inequality, and if not, what are the mechanisms available for its change? Remember, this book was written in '72. 40 years ago. Now we've got 43 million people on food stamps? I mean, America, my fellow Americans, you've been duped. And if you want to argue with me, that's fine. The debate is on. But the fact of the matter is that you are either financially independent or you're financially dependent. And if you're financially dependent, chances are you're a couple of paychecks away from financial destitution. Why? Because you probably haven't saved, you haven't stocked up, you're not prepared, you're counting on something that could be taken away in an instant. I mean, we don't have a right to a job. That's a myth. That's made up. I mean, basically, you have the rights. The law of the jungle prevails. Basically, you have a right to breathe. You have a right to eliminate because you can't help it. And you have a right to do whatever it takes to keep from getting eaten or mangled by some other beast, whether it's two-legged or four-legged or no-legged. Those are your rights. Everything else, you basically have to earn or take. So, once again, I say the economy's fine, even though you could say, well, how can you say it's fine when you're talking about all these people on food stamps and you say there's no middle class? What I'm saying is that there's nothing wrong with the mechanisms of the economy. You can still go out and purchase goods and services. They're available. It's not like there's scarcity. And whether or not people are buying things on credit or using actual cash, that really makes no difference. It's just the fact that there's really no middle class. It's one or the other. It's black and white. You're either financially independent or you're not. Wake up, America. Smell the tyranny.